There is a company that makes the bread in your pantry right now and you have never heard of it. Not the brand on the bag. The company that owns the brand. The company that owns dozens of brands. The company that somewhere in the past 20 years quietly acquired the bakeries and the recipes and the distribution routes and the factory relationships that produce the bread and the muffins and the donuts and the bagels that Americans have been eating since childhood without once asking who actually makes them. The company is called Grupo Bimbo. It is Mexican. It is headquartered in Mexico City. It is the largest baking company in the world. And it owns Wonder Bread, Thomas English Muffins, Entenmann's, Sara Lee, Arnold, Brownberry, Oro Wheat, Ballpark Buns, Mrs. Baird's, Baboli, and approximately 100 other brands that together account for a significant portion of every bread product sold in the United States. The company that supplies the hamburger buns to American backyard barbecues and the English muffins to American breakfast tables and the sandwich bread to American school lunches is a Mexican company that most Americans have never heard of and could not find on a map. The story of how this happened is not a story about a hostile takeover or a corporate raid or a financial engineering scheme. It is a story about a family from Spain that came to Mexico in the 1940s, built a bakery, developed an obsessive commitment to quality and distribution, and spent 60 years executing a strategy so patient and so consistent that by the time the American baking industry noticed what was happening, it was already done. Lorenzo Cervelló was born in Barcelona in 1918 to a family of Catalan bakers. His father ran a pastry shop. Lorenzo grew up inside the trade, learning from childhood what good bread required and what distinguished a bakery that lasted from one that did not. The family emigrated to Mexico in the early part of the 20th century as part of the significant wave of Spanish immigration that brought tens of thousands of Catalans and Basques and Galicians to Mexico through the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Mexico in that era was actively recruiting European immigrants and European capital, and the Spanish community that established itself in Mexico City became one of the more commercially active immigrant communities in the country, with particular concentration in food, retail, and manufacturing. Lorenzo studied accounting and worked briefly in the family business before deciding, in 1945, that he wanted to build something of his own. He gathered a small group of partners, 5 in total including his brother Roberto and several friends, and they pooled their capital to open a small industrial bakery in Mexico City. They called it Panificadora Bimbo, taking the name from a bear mascot that Lorenzo's daughter had drawn, a round cheerful white bear that would become one of the most recognized brand icons in Latin American consumer products history. The initial operation was modest. 34 workers. 10 products. A small fleet of delivery trucks. A territory covering a few neighborhoods of Mexico City. What Lorenzo understood from the beginning, and what distinguished Bimbo from the dozens of other small bakeries operating in Mexico City at the time, was that the product was only half the business. The other half was distribution. A bakery that makes excellent bread and cannot get it to the consumer fresh is not a viable business. A bakery that makes good bread and can get it to every corner store and every market stall and every household in its territory every single day, reliably and affordably, is a monopoly in the making. Lorenzo built the distribution network with the same care he applied to the recipes. He invested in trucks when trucks were expensive. He mapped routes with obsessive precision. He trained drivers to be salespeople, to build relationships with the shopkeepers on their routes, to understand what each customer needed and when. The Bimbo truck becoming a daily presence on Mexican streets, as reliable as the sunrise, was not an accident. It was a deliberate operational strategy executed over decades. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Bimbo expanded across Mexico methodically. City by city, state by state, building the distribution infrastructure before expanding the product line, making sure the logistics could support the growth before the growth happened. This sequencing was deliberate and it was unusual. Most companies expand the product first and build the distribution to catch up. Lorenzo did the opposite. He built the road before he drove on it. By the time Bimbo entered a new market, the delivery network was already in place, the relationships with retailers were already established, the operational knowledge of how to serve that specific geography was already accumulated. The competitor trying to enter the same market afterward was not just fighting a brand. It was fighting a logistics infrastructure that had taken years to build and could not be quickly replicated. By the 1980s, Bimbo was the dominant baking company in Mexico. Its white bear logo was as recognizable to Mexican consumers as any brand in the country. Its product line had expanded from the original 10 items to hundreds, covering every category of packaged baked goods from sliced bread to cakes to cookies to snack products. Its distribution network covered the entire country, reaching not just urban supermarkets but the small family-owned tiendas in rural communities that the large retail chains could not profitably serve. Bimbo served them because Lorenzo had decided from the beginning that the goal was to reach every consumer, not just the ones that were convenient to reach. The unprofitable route to the remote village was part of the system, not an exception to it. The international expansion begins in the late 1980s and accelerates through the 1990s. First Central America, then South America, then the United States. The American entry is initially modest and targeted, acquiring small regional bakeries and building from those footholds. But the ambition behind it is not modest at all. Daniel Servage, Lorenzo's son, who takes over as CEO in 1997 and who runs the company through its period of greatest international expansion, is explicit about the goal. Bimbo intends to be the largest baking company in the world. Not the largest in Mexico. Not the largest in Latin America. The largest in the world. And the path to that runs through the United States, which is the largest baked goods market on earth. The acquisitions that transform Bimbo from a major Mexican company into the dominant global baker happen in a compressed period between 2008 and 2014. In 2008, Bimbo acquires the fresh bread operations of George Weston Foods in the United States, adding brands including Arnold, Brownberry, and Orowheat to its American portfolio. These are not obscure regional brands. Arnold has been baking bread in the northeastern United States since 1940. Orowheat has been one of the dominant whole grain bread brands on the American West Coast since the 1930s. Brownberry is the leading premium bread brand across the Midwest. With a single acquisition, Bimbo moves from a minor player in the American market to a significant one, with established brands, established distribution, and established relationships with American retailers that would have taken decades to build from scratch. Then in 2011, Bimbo acquires Sara Lee's North American fresh bakery business. This is a transformational deal. Sara Lee is not a niche brand. Sara Lee bread and Sara Lee baked goods are embedded in American food culture in a way that goes back to the post-war era. The company's slogan, "Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee," was one of the most recognizable advertising lines in American television history. The brands under the Sara Lee umbrella, including the Sara Lee name itself, ballpark buns, and numerous regional brands, collectively represent a massive share of the American commercial bread market. The acquisition costs approximately $959 million. It makes Bimbo the largest commercial baker in the United States. In 2014, Bimbo acquires Canada Bread, a major Canadian baking company, extending its North American dominance across the border. The combined North American operation now includes more than 100 bakeries, more than 50,000 employees, tens of thousands of delivery routes, and a brand portfolio covering virtually every segment of the commercial bread market. The Mexican company that Lorenzo Servage started in 1945 with 34 workers and 10 products now employs more than 134,000 people globally, operates in 33 countries, and generates annual revenues of approximately $17 billion. It is not one of the largest baking companies in the world. It is the largest baking company in the world, by a significant margin. The Wonder Bread story within the larger Bimbo story is worth examining separately because Wonder Bread is not just a bread. It is an American cultural artifact. Wonder Bread was introduced in 1921 by the Taggart Baking Company in Indianapolis and acquired by Continental Baking in 1925. It was one of the first commercially sliced breads in America after the invention of the bread slicing machine in 1928. The phrase "the greatest thing since sliced bread" is a direct reference to the cultural moment when Wonder Bread popularized pre-sliced commercial bread in American households. For generations of American children, Wonder Bread was simply what bread was, the soft white sandwich bread in the red, yellow, and blue polka dot bag that their mothers bought at the grocery store and that their fathers ate with every meal. It was not a premium product. It was not a specialty product. It was the baseline, the default, the thing that bread meant before bread meant anything more complicated than bread. Continental Baking, Wonder Bread's longtime owner, was acquired by Hostess Brands, which went bankrupt in 2012 in one of the more dramatic corporate collapses in American food industry history. The bankruptcy was precipitated by a labor dispute with the Bakers Union that ended with the company announcing it would liquidate entirely, eliminating 18,500 jobs and taking with it not just Wonder Bread but Hostess's entire portfolio of iconic snack cakes including Twinkies, Ho-Hos, and Ding Dongs. The American press treated the Hostess bankruptcy as a cultural crisis, running elegies for Twinkies and Wonder Bread as if a piece of the American childhood was being buried. Grupo Bimbo acquired the Wonder Bread brand and certain associated assets out of the bankruptcy, adding the most iconic American bread brand to a portfolio that already included Arnold and Oro Wheat and Sara Lee and dozens of other American bread names. A Mexican company now owns Wonder Bread. The bread that American children grew up eating, that their parents grew up eating, that their grandparents grew up eating, the bread so foundational to American food culture that its slicing gave rise to a common idiom, is made by a company founded in Mexico City in 1945 by a Catalan immigrant who wanted to bake good bread and get it to every household in his city. The distribution network that makes all of this possible is an achievement that deserves as much attention as the acquisitions themselves. Bimbo in the United States operates one of the largest direct store delivery distribution networks in the country. Direct store delivery means that Bimbo trucks drive directly to individual retail stores and stock the bread shelves themselves, rather than shipping to retail distribution centers and letting the retailer handle the last mile. This gives Bimbo extraordinary control over shelf placement, product freshness, and inventory management at the store level. It also gives Bimbo a relationship with every retail store manager in its distribution territory that a competitor supplying through a retail distribution center simply cannot replicate. The Bimbo driver who comes to your local grocery store 3 times a week, who knows the store manager by name, who knows exactly how much bread that store sells on a Tuesday versus a Saturday, who pulls the day-old product and replaces it with fresh before the store opens, is performing a service that is simultaneously a logistics function and a sales function and a relationship management function. It is the same insight that Lorenzo Cervich had in Mexico City in 1945. The distribution network is the business. The bread is what you put in it. What the Bimbo story reveals about how power actually works in the consumer economy is uncomfortable for people who think they know what they are buying when they buy a loaf of bread. The brand on the bag, Wonder Bread or Arnold or Sara Lee or Oro Wheat, feels like it says something about where the bread comes from and who makes it and what values or traditions are embedded in it. The American family that has been buying Arnold whole wheat for 30 years believes it is buying something specific, something with a particular relationship to a particular baking tradition. What it is actually buying is a product made by a Mexican company in a factory that may be the same factory or may not be, delivered by a driver who works for Bimbo North America, and sold under a brand name that Bimbo acquired in a corporate transaction that the bread-buying public was never made aware of and would not have known to look for. This is not a criticism. The bread is the same bread. The quality standards that made Arnold and Oro Wheat and Sara Lee trusted brands are maintained under Bimbo ownership because Bimbo's entire business model depends on maintaining the trust that those brands represent. A company that destroys the quality of a brand it acquires is a company that destroys the asset it paid for. Bimbo does not do that. But the story of who actually makes American bread, who owns the factories and the recipes and the distribution routes and the driver relationships and the retail shelf space that determine what Americans eat every morning, is a story that points to Mexico City, to a Catalan immigrant's bakery, to a white bear mascot drawn by a child in 1945, and to a family that spent 80 years executing one of the most patient and most successful corporate strategies in the history of the global food industry.